Stanley Kubrick has directed some of the most beautifully shot films of all time, but the foundation of all that he created stems back to his roots as a photographer during his teen years in the 1940s. During this pivotal time, he would establish an artistic voice that would go on to create some of the greatest films of all time, including 2001: A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, Dr. Strangelove, and many more. But why was this part of his life so instrumental in what was to come? What helped him to define his early style? And who influenced him in ways that would shape the legendary career to come? This is Cinema Meets Photography, Stanley Kubrick. This video is brought to you by Dehancer Film Emulation. During his school days, he didn't perform well academically, but thrived through lessons that taught him real-world applications. His late teen years and early 20s spent at Look magazine became highly influential as the source of education he would need to go on to create great films. Kubrick stated, "By the time I was 21, I had 4 years of seeing how things worked in the world. I think if I had gone to college, I would never have become a director." Covering a wide range of topics from celebrities to shoeshine boys and nightclubs to sporting events, he developed his photographic voice through the variety of subject matter that he shot, laying out shot sequences that went hand in hand with long-form narrative essays, which leveled up his storytelling abilities, and innovative shooting techniques, including hidden cameras that use shutter release cables to get the shot. They give an early insight into the ways that he would go on to creatively implement filming techniques, and candid or staged moments of street photography that helped him to develop the skills that he would need later on to direct actors, were also the first major indication of his prolific work ethic that can be seen through 135 articles he created photos for during a short 5-year span. Kubrick's father, who was a serious amateur photographer himself, set Stanley down his photographic career path when he gifted him a camera on his 13th birthday. 4 years later, at the age of 17, Look magazine proved to be the greatest place Kubrick could have landed to advance his photography, since they focused their attention on covering such a wide range of subject matter. This allowed Kubrick to have a wide range of photographic experiences that go hand in hand with two of the magazine's mission statements. One being that they wanted to include material for the reader themselves, their wife, the private secretary, and the office boy, and the other being that they wanted to see life, to see the world, to eyewitness great events, to watch the faces of the poor, and the gestures of the proud. Timing and location played a huge part in Kubrick's ability to grow and thrive as a creative as well. In the post-war era of the 1940s, magazines were extremely popular, since people had money to spend on them, and it was the time before television took off, making magazines and newspapers the easy-access visual mediums of the day. Being located in New York City was also a huge factor. It was the capital of its time, more important than it had ever been, leading the world in image production via art and advertising. The myriad of topics he would go on to create work around were only easy to access in a city like New York, and it was also the place that many magazines called home. At the time, street photography was growing through a number of photographers in New York who were all around the same age as Kubrick, and all developing different voices in the medium at the same time, many of whom have already previously been covered on the channel. Names like Arbus, Leiter, Frank, Klein, Irwit, Davidson, and Friedlander. Writer Lucy Sante points out that there were instances when the work of Kubrick and Winogrand overlapped, and was mistaken for one another's even though they were aesthetically different. She wrote, "Winogrand's study of a young boxer, titled What Makes Nick Run, is tonally very close to Kubrick's work on similar subjects. Winogrand also had the downtime necessary to start building a radical style of his own, with his trademark tilted horizons and chaotic welter of visual information showing up very early in his portfolio. Kubrick, by contrast, was learning all the skills while tethered to a specific mandate. Clarity and coverage were uppermost, and the self-expression secondary at best. As much as New York was perfect for finding subject matter, the often tight spaces and frantic pace of the city made it difficult for Kubrick to work on shot compositions, which is something so many of his films are known for, as the term Kubrickian has become synonymous with these types of shots and framing. An early example of his development of this skill was through his work at the Palisades amusement park in 1946. There, the space opened up and speed slowed down, in a way that allowed him to dial in the best places for subjects within his frames. Look magazine had a more grounded and intimate view of the world than their major competitor, Life. This video is brought to you by Dehancer Film Emulation, a plugin to help photographers and videographers achieve the look of film through digital means within the following software: For more information on how Dehancer can help you achieve the look of film on your frames by adding authentic and tested looks, compression, grain, halation, bloom, and more, check the link in the description. Look covered many stories that focused on the darker side of daily life in America through topics like alcoholism, divorce, and juvenile delinquency. The exact context of the story and how it was to be covered encouraged photographers who found success at Look to shoot as much as possible. And they did this to give their editors as many choices as possible to craft their stories. Historian Mary Panzer noted that Look functioned with more freedom than Life did, giving its creative teams a lot more room to work as they pleased. And a quote from Panzer reflecting on this mirrors Kubrick's filmography to some extent. They decided how to tell the best story. It made for an uneven and often surprising magazine. The first piece from Kubrick to appear in Look was of a depressed newspaper salesman taken on the day after the death of FDR. However, this was not a candid photo, but one directed by Kubrick to give the photo more drama, showcasing an early example of his directorial skills. The photo is what led Look to hire Kubrick at the age of 17 for $50 per week just before he graduated high school. This wasn't normal practice for the magazine, but since they had already purchased several of Kubrick's photos before, they were willing to take a chance. A lot of his early work at Look was essentially street photography that included small captions that indicated his draw towards the human condition. Through this, he showed a natural aptitude for storytelling by creating narrative arcs in his images. For example, the article titled "Life and Love on the New York Subway" comes with a caption that reads, "New York subway trains are a reading room on wheels, a lover's lane, and, after 11 p.m., a flophouse." This was also Kubrick's first story to make the cover's masthead. He spent 2 weeks riding New York subway cars to create these images. To capture them, he ran a shutter release down his sleeve and wore the camera around his neck. This allowed him to take photos while remaining undetected, in a very similar fashion to Walker Evans' earlier work that came together in a book titled Many Are Called. What's so odd about the similarities of these two projects is that although Evans created his images in 1941, they weren't released until the 1960s. So the fact that both men had the same idea that landed them similar results taken around the same time is a great moment of multiple discovery. Lucy Sante argued that a lot of Kubrick's early work, like the Subway Project, were ran as a series of similar photos to allow the work as a whole to have a stronger influence on the viewer. Additionally, she stated that you could also make a case that Kubrick was already beginning to think in cinematic terms, that his shooting ratios were so large because he was more interested in capturing continuity of action than in a single image crowded with meaning. He was also able to quickly grow as a photojournalist when he joined Arthur Rothstein and John Vachon, who had both worked as photographers for the Farm Security Administration during the Great Depression, along names like Gordon Parks, Walker Evans, and Dorothea Lange. According to a writing by Donald Albrick and Sean Colquhoun, Look's senior photographers also mentored Kubrick in his personal life, forming a Bringing Up Stanley Club to help the teenager navigate the adult workplace and world. Apparently, one of the primary objectives of this group was to get Kubrick to dress like a professional, which eventually helped him take the next step towards growth in his career. Once 1947 came around, Kubrick began to expand his photojournalism process by including more narrative in his images. The first of these was called Shoeshine Boy. It followed the daily life of a hardworking child who kept a steady job while still taking part in activities of your average kid. A piece titled Columbia University looked at how American universities were progressing science of the era. And another piece titled How the Circus Gets Set showed exactly what's implied by the title. The images of this circus spread are specifically pointed out by Lucy Sante as another key moment in Kubrick's development as a great shot composer. She wrote, "He was able to indulge that tendency again when he photographed the Ringling Brothers Circus in 1948. The look spread leading off with this photo of owner John Ringling North, in 3/4 low angle, miming a yell in a cupped hand, while aerial acrobats ride the wire above and to the left. A post-war, leisure time version of the constructivist poster shot. He also created more extensive narrative work at this time about a couple's trip to Portugal and an orphanage in Chicago. According to Albrecht and Colquhoun, of the topics Kubrick covered for Look, however, none align more closely with his burrowing interest in film than the explorations of entertainment and media. Even the key aspects of New York City's economy and identity. Stories about radio and television personalities demonstrated Kubrick's transition from a novice learning his trade to a more mature artist pushing the boundaries of powerful and humanistic photojournalism. His ability to translate an individual's complex psychology into visual form was apparent. In each profile, Kubrick explored the public and private lives of these figures. This era of Kubrick's work, and what looked published, did a lot to bring public attention to television, since it was a newer form of media at the time. Through this, Kubrick created behind-the-scenes photographs of several shows, and created a spread that introduced different pieces of equipment used in television production to Look's audience. The close observations Kubrick was able to make at this time was another step towards developing from photographer to legendary director. Albrecht and Corcoran go on to point out that the clearest premonition of Kubrick's film career can be seen through his unpublished photographs taken on the set of the Academy Award-winning film The Naked City, one of Hollywood's first productions to revive on-location filmmaking. It must have been thrilling to experience for an avid consumer of popular film noir at the city's commercial theaters, as well as more artistic fare at the Museum of Modern Art. Kubrick spent many hours on the set watching the director and cinematographer film dark police procedurals on the streets of New York City. While it is unknown if this was a seminal experience that got Kubrick interested in filmmaking, it surely had an impact on the young man. In his spare time, Stanley experiments with cinematography and dreams of the day when he can make documentary films, Look magazine noted in May 1948. Kubrick's photos of the Naked City also point out another instance where street photography influenced his work, since the film was inspired by Weegee's legendary photography. This evolution of behind-the-scenes photography and narrative photojournalism eventually led to the creation of the story called Prizefighter. To create this work, Kubrick took photos of two boxing matches that featured Walter Cartier, a young boxer who was making a name for himself at the time in New York boxing circles. The process later led Kubrick to work with Cartier again to create his first documentary film titled Day of the Fight. This 16-minute film is what many point to as the turning point in Kubrick's career that truly set him on the course to become a filmmaker. The film, Day of the Fight, is mostly a recreation of the photos from The Prizefighter, and the reason this is so significant is that this film laid the foundation for Kubrick's noir film, Killer's Kiss. The first 20 minutes of Killer's Kiss are essentially a recreation of Day of the Fight. This came after his first film, Fear and Desire, which was released in 1953, and is one that Kubrick began working on shortly after he quit Look magazine in 1950, in an effort to pursue filmmaking as a full-time career. Lucy Sante summarized her feelings on the entirety of Kubrick's time as a photographer, saying, "Kubrick's work at Look is valuable in its own right, as a portrait of New York City at a crucial point, just after the war, and just before everyone owned a TV set, when it was at its motley and innocent peak, and as a first-rate collection of photographs by an up-and-coming documentary photographer, perhaps not yet entirely formed, but poised to strike out on a highly individual path. As the embryonic work of a major film director, it offers too many clues, both psychological and aesthetic, to what lies ahead. You can see the beginning of Kubrick's moods, his deep space compositions, his restless toggling between the micro and the macro. The viewer can also appreciate his fanatical attention to detail, and his insistence on employing the world as a vast studio in which no nuance goes overlooked, and nothing is left to mere chance. Stanley Kubrick was fortunate in his first place of employment. It is there that he learned to look. In summary of all that he learned at Look, Albrecht and Corcoran wrote, Kubrick's 5-year tenure at Look proved formative. There, he participated in the process of making art in a collaborative setting, not unlike filmmaking. He learned to tell stories through images in dynamic narrative sequences, and to focus on subtle human interactions. He mastered how to frame, compose, and light compelling images, many of which have the dispassionate view of life he would adapt in many of his films. Reviewing Kubrick's early career at Look, it's possible to regard that experience as just the start of his celebrated career as an artist and filmmaker, a time when he honed his skills as both a storyteller and an image maker, albeit through a different lens. I want to give credit where credit is due. Much of this writing is paraphrased from Through a Different Lens, Stanley Kubrick Photographs, by Donald Albrecht and Sean Corcoran, and Stanley Kubrick Learning to Look, by Lucy Sante. Both writings are found in the book Through a Different Lens, Stanley Kubrick Photographs. Typically, I draw from 20 or 30 articles to write my scripts for these videos, but this book was so well written, and from everything else I was looking up, it was clear that it was the best source to draw from. I highly suggest picking up this book to support these writers and the book itself, if you're a fan of Kubrick and you want to read more in depth about the topic. Thanks for watching, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, keep developing.